Thanks for joining us this week. I'm Alex Prochet in for Gene. My first guest today is Nathan Fletcher. He is running against former District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis for the Board of Supervisors in District 4, and that includes a large chunk of the city of San Diego, Ocean Beach on up to La Jolla, Kearny Mesa down to Encanto. Nathan is a Marine. He's worked in the State Assembly. He's also a professor of political science. Nathan, thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Now, you've mentioned in the past that you think one of the biggest issues the county is facing is the status quo.
Right.
And you're running for a seat to join Greg Cox, Board of Supervisors since 1995, Diane Jacob, first elected in 1992.
Right.
You get where I'm going with this. A lot of people would call these folks the establishment, and you'll be in the minority here.
Right.
How do you get things accomplished?
Well, look, I'm a Marine. We know how to get things done. You know, I'm a Marine. We fight, we persevere, we don't give up, we never quit. And so the ability to get things done is not in question. When I went to the State Assembly, everyone said you won't get anything done, and we had over 30 pieces of legislation, from Chelsea's Law to things helping homeless youth to environmental protections passed and signed into law. And the time since then, I've raised money and helped drive legislation to help mental health treatment for veterans. I brought our deported veterans home. I know how to get things done. The question is, what do we want to have get done? We have an all-5 Republican Board of Supervisors that's too busy voting themselves pay raises and voting to spend our tax dollars joining Donald Trump's agenda, as opposed to investing in our neighborhoods, as opposed to fighting for mental health treatment, as opposed to tackling the homeless crisis, as opposed to tackling the housing crisis, ensuring clean air and clean water. And so I think it is going to take somebody new. I think it's going to take somebody outside with a track record of accomplishment. I think we need a Democrat on the Board of Supervisors. And I think we will be in a position to begin to drive the change and policies that I wish the county had been doing over the last 20 years.
Let's talk about some issues real quick.
Sure.
Foster care. We spoke about the case of Michael Jerome Hayes last week.
Right.
He was a foster parent who's currently spending more than 20 years behind bars for, among other things, mistreatment of some of his children, foster kids. Now, 2 of his kids have settled a lawsuit with San Diego County, among other things, for San Diego leaving them in Hayes' custody, despite more than a dozen reports of suspected abuse from an educator, a lawyer, and others. Now, you've called on the Board of Supervisors to have an emergency review of all the cases of foster kids here in San Diego County. That's at least more than 2,000 kids. We had Morgan Cook on last week. She's the reporter that broke this story. We've always talked about how foster social workers are overworked. I mean, how is a board of 5 going to accomplish this?
Well, this isn't, we're a country that put a man on the moon and brought him back. This is not an insurmountable task to say we have to protect children who are in our care and custody. The question is there the will? The county didn't have a problem offering the Chargers $150 million for a stadium, but then when it comes time to say, let's have enough social workers, let's make sure people have the resources, let's make sure we're protecting kids, they go, oh, we don't know if we can do it. Look, there is nothing more important that the county does than protecting children who are entrusted to their care. This is an issue that's of paramount importance to me. I was raised, my mom runs shelters for battered women and children, for people who have been failed by the system. In the State Assembly, I authored legislation on both adoption and foster care. I adopted 2 kids myself. This is one of the highest priorities. And the fact that the county started by blaming the victims and has now moved to at least settle and acknowledge their fault has to be followed up by not letting this issue go. Because there were so many red flags that were missed in this story, it gives reasonable concern there is a systematic failure. And so I've called for an independent county grand jury to look at the totality of the system and make recommendations. And then the second thing is to review. And if the county can bring in extra people to count signatures for a convention center ballot measure on the weekends, then certainly they can find people who can come in and review these cases to make sure other children have not been harmed as well.
You talked about red flags. I mean, what were some of those red flags?
Well, you had multiple instances of that, where you had an educator who tried to make a recommendation. You had a social worker who was warned. I mean, there was a series of things. And what it reminds me of is, remember a few years ago when the plane crashed in University City? And the Marine Corps did a thorough investigation. They did it in a transparent way. Marines went to jail. Their careers were ended. They put in place policy changes. They apologized. And they restored the faith in the public that this was an isolated incident that would not happen again. We're calling on the county to exert that same type of Marine Corps leadership, to say this was a horrible situation, but we are going to move heaven and earth to make sure it never happens again, and they still have yet to do that.
But a part of that, and even when those red flags are raised, whether it be a social worker or an educator, this, that, and the other, is some discretion at the and for the person who's reviewing those claims. So, I mean, how do you go about?
But the discretion has to be, there has to be a culture that says our discretion, our operating assumption is to believe the child. You know, if a child tells you that they're being abused, you need to believe that child, and that needs to be the operating assumption. And the highest priority needs to be given to how do we thoroughly investigate and review. You know, in one case they showed up, the kid wasn't available to talk, so they let it go. No, then you go back the next day. And if they need more social workers, which I believe that they do, and if they need more resources, which I believe that they do, then give them that. Then give them that. This is a county that's sitting on almost $2 billion of cash reserves. They have the money to take care of kids. And if they have the money to vote themselves pay raises and to build beautiful buildings for themselves and to do all of these other types of things, the problem at the county is not that they don't have the will or the resources. The problem is they're pointed in the wrong direction. If they have the money to join Trump's lawsuits against California, then don't tell me that you don't have the money to try and make our foster care system work.
Nathan, one other issue that I want to touch on before we go. Mental health, that's also something that's been really important to you. So a report earlier this month from Tri-City Medical Center in Oceanside has closed a 12-person crisis stabilization unit, and that could be emblematic of something else that's going to spread throughout the county. Why is this happening?
Well, there's a failure of regional leadership when it comes to this issue. And I went down to the Board of Supervisors and I said, it's time for you to show leadership. They wanted to vote to study the problem, which is fine. They can study it. I want them to take action. Tri-Cities is closing those units because of federal requirements that they change the ceilings in their hospital, and they said, we can't afford to do it. The ceilings only cost $3 million to change, and I told the Board of Supervisors, give them the $3 million and keep those beds open. But also the county has a facility in Rosecrans, a psychiatric inpatient treatment facility. And when you do the work and you look it up, you will find the state has licensed that facility to operate 109 beds. They're currently operating about 40 of them. So if the county cares about this issue, then they need to open the available beds in their own facilities. And then we need action from the state to help on issues. We need action from the federal government to help on issues. And we're going to have to expect a lot more from our hospital system for them to step up and shoulder their share of the load. This is a regional problem, and there's going to have to be a regional solution. But it starts with leadership, and the county needs to start leading now.
Nathan Fletcher, running for the County Board of Supes, District 4. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely.